You guys, thank you for being back. Thank you for tuning in. This is a self selecting podcast. I'm your host, Corey Hageman, and today we are joined by Nick Ridpath, which, to be fair, I'm sure people are familiar with you because I share a lot of your reels. Like, I feel like most of the content you put out, I'm like, this is money. This applies directly to the last like 4 conversations I've had with clients recently. So just like first off, thank you for caring, and thank you for indirectly like being the solution to a lot of the problems I have as a coach and a lot of my clients have, and athletes like myself have.
Of course, yeah, I try to do the Lord's work in the best way that I can. But I think too, like a lot of the stuff I talk about, it kind of cross applies, whether it's bodybuilding or training gen pop or training athletes. Like I try to cover as many general bases as I can, just general performance. Like I guess I mean that's almost a topic we can get into, but like human movement is human movement.
Okay, so I think that's a good opener. I feel like within the fitness space, specifically like the hypertrophy focused athlete, the fitness competitor, the fitness influencer, that individual, for whatever reason, has been sold this idea that because they're not oriented specifically around strength performance, that things apply much differently to them, and that their program and their exercise selection and their volume needs are much different. Is that something you see a lot of?
Oh yeah, I mean every bodybuilding program that's sent to me is just all volume, all bands, all like intricate exercise selection. It's like very like special stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's so far from what the movement was originally designed for. I think the one we were talking about at L3 last time was the B stance RDL with the banded loop over the mid thigh with an ipsilateral load. I see a
Oh, oh
lot
my
of
Lord.
that.
I honestly, I find it very admirable, the creativity at least that comes out of some of these programs. Like I see new stuff every day, and I'm like, wow, I'm not sure what that's doing, but I never would have thought about that. So at least props on their creativity.
The effort is there. The effort is there in the I don't know, creative design. But I
I
guess
would call
kind
it
of
delusion, but yeah, sure.
delusion, yes. I'm being, arguably misrepresenting what it is, because I do find for me, a lot of clients come into my sphere either, for coaching or one time consultations. And I build out their program and they're like, I don't know how I feel about this. It's very simple. It's very basic. It's not. It's not glute focused. There are too many compounds. I'm worried about growing my waist with all of these compound movements, and I feel like between the both of us, like I mean, like it's just the same conversations, probably again and again, specifically with your athletes who are more hypertrophy focused. But I guess before we get into it, would you give a brief intro? Just tell listeners who aren't already familiar with you who you are, what you do.
Yeah, oh man, it's kind of tough for me to always talk about what I do because I work with such a variety of people. Um, so I mean, I played college football, so I definitely like kind of had a background in athletics. I got into that a bit after college, training predominantly athletes. I had a job working in a physical therapy clinic, so I was doing a lot of like post rehab work as well. I started training basically at early point in my career. I was like, I'll train anybody. I'll just say yes to everything, and just to make a buck, do what I can, and build my skill set. So I was doing lots of gen pop, started doing online. At the time, I was like, I want to be a meathead. Like I was done training for performance, so I was just like digging stuff out of like, bodybuilding.com still. My reliving my high school days. So yeah, I had a pretty broad experience starting out. Moved up to DC and started working out at DMB Iron, and kind of did the same thing there. Just like whatever came to me, I kind of ran with it, and somehow I've just gotten a lot of weird opportunities to work with, bodybuilders, pro athletes, gen pop, still getting a lot of like post rehab stuff. So still doing the same stuff 5 years later, but yeah, it's cool. It's fun. I do a little bit of everything. That's the best way to put it.
I feel like you offer so much value within a space, like more so the biomechanics space online, that like something that really appeals to me about your content is that you do break it down. You're not just, I don't know, articulating, straight from a textbook and explaining like, well, this is what this is supposed to do. You actually teach through that short form content, which I think for a lot of people, they think, okay, well, it's going to need to be long form. I'm going to, I must be in person. And I can say for me, like I've gained so much value just from like the short form that you put out, because I think you do a good job of, one of the pillars like within Prescript is like meeting the client where they're at. And frankly, for myself and a lot of my demographic, there's not a strong starting point in understanding principles of biomechanics, even just general training principles. So personally, like what I've seen is I would say really those knowledge gaps being filled with misinformation, or this idea that like more is better, arbitrary to what kind of trajectory that leads the athlete down. So specifically, like when we're talking about athletes like myself, or fitness competitors, bikini competitors, it's like there's this goal to be very specific with developing glutes, not develop the quads. And what we've seen a lot of online is that like there is this desire to overcomplicate movements and shy away from some of the movements that frankly are going to give you the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think there's the tendency to make things either more intricate or just increase them. So try to make all these special variations or just do more volume for the sake of doing volume, as opposed to maximizing what we're doing or refining what we're doing. So doing less or doing more with less, and then just being better at what we're doing. I think those are a couple of areas we should just focus on instead of being super intricate. Like, get good at the basics before you try to get good at all this intricate stuff. Instead, we're kind of skipping over the basics. It's like everybody who comes to me, asking questions about, I need to grow my glutes, I need to grow my shoulders, and I look at their program and I'm like, there's a bunch of fancy shit in here, and then I put you through the basic stuff, and you can't even do the basics that well. So like, let's just get good at the basics first, and like, let's see the progress we make there.
I love that. And, like this really mimics the way I think Jordan kind of took me through one of the first times like we were training together, is just like understanding what it means to be stable at the midline, like truly having an idea of what it feels like even to have good core control and be able to brace under heavy load. And I mean, like even further within that space, or my space, like you see this reliance on like waist trainers, and a lot of times it's like waist trainers in addition to weightlifting belt. And I've had conversations with clients where I'm like, hey, like walk me through your intention behind using this tool. And sadly a lot of them are like, well, I want to grow my glutes, but I want to I've literally heard people use the word disjoint. I want to disconnect my lower body from my upper body while I'm doing this RDL. And I'm like, that's insane. Like, I don't know who told you that, and like, how far like you've gone down this like rabbit hole. But like, to your point, like there is just this belief that over specificity is the answer in these types of sports. And I guess I want to ask, so when we look at what your kind of assessment would be like with this demographic, with someone who comes to you, I'm like, hey, I need to put multiple inches on my glutes. Maybe I can develop my quads a little bit, but I need to not have them grow at the same rate as my glutes. What does that intro assessment look like? What are the things that you're really trying to distill out as far as skill?
Yeah, well, I think we can break up the glute training, or at least like movement categories. So like, how well did we hinge? Within that, how do we control our pelvis? How well do we move through our hips? How do we control our center of mass? Kind of like the most common representation we'll see of that is like weight starts in the heels, ends in the heels. Or we have no ability to get more into our midfoot and actually get into a strong position to load the movement, right? So not only the exercise we're doing, how are we doing it? So how do we hinge? I like to see us stand on one leg, or at least like a limited base of support. So like a split squat, or like a rear foot elevated split squat, or a step down. Can we actually shift into our lateral hip? So can we get something like our big toe or knee, sternum in line with a square pelvis, or are we trying to resort to get out of that? If we kind of look at that, that's going to be like a fully lengthened glute, right? So can we get into positions to actually get length to our glutes? Because if we can get length to our glutes and we can shorten our glutes, then we can train them across that spectrum well, right? We can put load through them well, and we can use them to move load well. So honestly, I was going to say a few more movements, but yeah, how do we hinge? how do we stand on one leg? How well do we do that? If we can kind of break apart those two and find what we're lacking, we can go a long ways.
I like that. And I will say, like, I was a part of that camp that, lived and died by the hip thrust. I was like, that's what we need to do. It's, hyper focused on building the glutes. And, really for a long part of my career, I actually shied away from split squats entirely, let alone bilateral squats. But even hinging, I'm like, I feel a lot of sensation in the hamstring. And of course, like many listeners can probably relate, if you were into fitness and listening to different trainers and coaches kind of put out this idea that like everything for glutes needs to be weighted in the heel, well, then it can be a little different. And I mean, I would say even like confusing for someone who's like yourself or myself coming in like, hey, no, we need to have that big toe down. Like we need your center of mass to be over your foot and not behind it. Like you're never going to be able to truly progress or really see what your capability is in terms of loadability, which now we've seen at this point. It's like, okay, the athlete who is coming to you or myself, yeah, I need them to lift heavy, but that kind of starts and ends with their ability to control their center of mass.
Yeah, everything has to be like more glute, like weight back in the heels. We have to just understand there's going to be a point of diminishing returns with that, especially if we look at like, I don't know physics at all, but I know like a vector is something that's like magnitude and direction, right? As opposed to scalar is just magnitude, right? So it's not just like what's the load that we're doing, but what's the direction of that stimulus. So at some point, we might be changing the direction of the stimulus. Maybe it is more glute, if we could even argue that's a valid thought process. Maybe it is more glute, but we're decreasing the loading by so much that we're actually not getting more stimulus, right? We're just taking away from the other side of that equation. So everything being in the heel at some point is going to put us in such unloadable positions that we're actually not improving our stimulus on these exercises.
Now within a hinge, okay, so this is something like recently, I want to say like last week, maybe the week before that, I shared one of your videos talking about trying to create full foot pressure. And I love that you really like, I guess like how you were delivering this information was very much like, I'm going to need you to do the opposite of what you think you should be doing. I need you to almost go for a positive shin angle, because realistically no one's going to fall forward in a hinge, even if they're trying to attain that, positive shin angle. But I've seen you post about this a lot. I've seen you talk about it and use it as a cue. Is that one that you would say like with hinging as a whole? I guess if we were to really like get nuanced with it, what are the most common things with something like a hinge, a bilateral RDL, that you see needs immediate correcting like out of the gate?
Yeah, okay. I would say first and foremost, let's just do like a checklist. What's your stance width? The first thing you'll see is like a super wide stance, or just a stance that's too wide for the individual. So we think about what the glutes do. Glutes do hip extension, external rotation. When we're hinging, we are trying to lengthen our glutes, right? So we need to get hip flexion and hip internal rotation, opposite of the action. So to get relative internal rotation, our stance can't be too wide. Like if we just stand, this is kind of like the common fallacy in like doing sumo stuff. If you just put your hands on your hips or on your glutes and you start walking and kind of wiggling into a sumo stance, you're going to feel them shortening. So we're putting ourselves in a position of disadvantage for actually getting more length to our glutes. So first and foremost, hip width stance. Second thing is going to be, I like to overemphasize what you're saying, which is a forward shin angle, or getting our weight more towards our toes. The goal is not to get our weight into our toes or to actually really push into a positive shin angle, but the goal is to make sure we're actually getting more close to like mid-foot pressure. We're going to be in a stronger position, right? And we're also going to fix the knees so that we're not moving both origin and insertion of the hamstrings. That's another thing too, right? So overemphasize that. You're not going to actually end up in your toes. You're not going to fall forward. I promise you, I've never seen it happen. You're just going to get in a stronger position. You're probably going to get instantly stronger. Or if you're bad at hinging, you're probably going to start shaking a little bit, because it'll be the first time that you've really loaded your glutes and hamstrings like that. And then another thing is going to be going up the chain now. Okay, what's our rib cage to pelvis relationship, right? Like, so are we stacked? Do we have a good core position? Or are we like throwing it back like a stripper, right? Like there's a lot of anterior pelvic tilt. I don't know another way to say that. That's just like my go-to. I call it stripper ass. We want to make sure we have stacked rib cage over pelvis, right? So pelvis is in a strong position. We can adequately put tension across muscles that attach to the pelvis, glutes, hamstrings. And then if I were to put like a cherry on top, I'd say head position. Especially for bodybuilders, they always want to see themselves in the mirror. The thing is, when we look up, our head goes back. When our head goes back, I'm not saying anybody has a massive head, but our head does have mass to it, right? So our center of mass is going to go back. It's going to make it easier for us to resort to our tendency of being in our heels. So I like the cue as looking down, not like an aggressive chin tuck or anything, but just head stays forward, gives us a better counterbalance to move our center of mass back in space.
I love it. That was delivered so beautifully. And I think even listeners who might not be as versed in this information can, hopefully have their notepads out and, kind of make this checklist, when you start, from the bottom up. One of the things that I see a lot of, and I'm hoping you can depict this, is horizontal knee movement as they're going into the hinge. So getting that negative shin angle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening and most hinges that I see. Right? So we have a hard time shifting our center of mass back, especially if we're starting already back. So if we're starting with our heels and we're trying to push back, we're probably going to have to move back to some degree, which is where we see the knees shifting back in space. Right? But again, it's putting us in a weak position. Also, we're moving both at the knee and the hip. So from a glute standpoint, we're just in a weaker position. From a hamstring standpoint, we're now moving both origin and insertion. So to generally understand, okay, hamstrings attach bottom of the pelvis somewhere across the knee joint somewhere. So we can kind of imagine hip, pelvis, and then knee joint, right? So one of those needs to stay fixed for us to adequately put tension across those fibers.
I love it. I love it. And I think when we go back, and I hope you can be patient with me, because I feel like this was something that, like, having RDLs for a long time, I'm like, okay, there's a point in which I can't continue to move up in weight. And for me, the limiting factor was I would start to feel my lower back, start to feel not necessarily pain, because I think there's a big distinction between pain and just lactic acid, just a burn in your erectors, in your QLs. And oftentimes that's what would signal to my brain, hey, we need to stop because this doesn't feel glute focused anymore. So I know you covered already, like keeping the rib cage stacked. So we want a neutral spine. We don't want the lower back arch. We don't want stripper booty. Let's unpack that a little bit more for individuals. Those who are feeling the lower back, who are feeling whether it be sensation like muscular fatigue. Why is this important when we're talking about loading the glutes in this kind of movement, something that's bilateral?
Yeah, so why is a neutral pelvis both important from a glute training standpoint as well as your back not hurting?
Yes.
Correct, right. Okay, so when we get into anterior pelvic tilt, one, we're going to be at a relatively weaker position for glutes, and hamstrings are going to be almost pre-lengthened, right? We can imagine how if we tilt the pelvis, we're going to be like stretching the hamstrings, right? And now we're kind of taking the glutes into a less advantageous position for us to go into hip extension. So from a mechanics standpoint, I'm no anatomy nerd or biomechanics nerd like you told me not to be. I'm not going to give you any research or anything, but generally speaking, that's what they're going to be doing. From a low back standpoint, we kind of think about generally what people are feeling is like SI joint discomfort, right? We kind of categorize like low back pain in a hinge is kind of at that. So we look at sacrum, so below the spine, bottom of the spine, ilium, hips, right? How are those moving in reference to one another? So if we're kind of in like a lumbar extension and we're not moving through our hips well, we're going to kind of just be jamming those two joints together. So we're not getting adequate movement at the joint. So instead of loading function, glutes, hamstrings, we're loading structure, SI joint.
Which at best is like, okay, that can be a little uncomfortable, but repeated stress, if you have someone who's just lifting this way or lifting heavier than what they can, like objectively, like they can't stabilize with, it's like that can very well be problematic and, begin to have an athlete, an individual develop this idea that like, oh, hey, I can't do hinging. I see this often with squats. It's like, my lower back hurts, so I don't do squats. So then there become these beliefs that are just set in stone. It's like, oh yeah, like we can do everything else but squat patterns. I don't want that in my program, when in reality, it might be as simple as teaching someone how to orient their pelvis over the rib cage over their pelvis. Hopefully, what's pelvis is over the rib cage.
Yeah, it's almost always, I don't want to say obvious, but like usually someone comes to me and my back hurts, or my shoulder hurts, or insert certain joint or muscle hurts, and you watch them move, and you're like, oh yeah, of course your back hurts, or of course your shoulder hurts. Like there's usually something to fix mechanically, right? It's not the exercise. Now we could argue that maybe based off of somebody's structure, maybe certain exercises are a bit more difficult for them, right? Like if I have 20% torso, 80% femur, and I'm a 6 foot tall female, I've seen that before. We still hinge, just a little bit harder to teach, right? So I'm not saying there's not value in it, but for some people, maybe it's a little bit harder for us to learn, which is more the reason to hire a coach. But little, if ever, I've ever seen like, oh, this exercise, this should not be done for this person, right? Usually, if our back hurts, there's a reason why our back hurts. If our shoulders hurt, there's a reason why our shoulders hurt. There's something mechanical that we could be doing better to execute the movement better for our structure, our body type, whatever we want to call it.
Absolutely. No, I love it. There's one thing on the bilateral, but actually, it'll come back to me. I wanna move into B stance. So how often are you using a B stance RDL, something let's say contralaterally loaded, to maybe even teach that pelvic stability?
Yeah, I love using. I wouldn't even say just a B stance RDL. I'd say like a good rule of thumb is once per session do something unilateral. Sorry, per lower body day. So if on average you're training lower body twice a week, or I know like a lot of bodybuilders like to do their glutes 3 days per week. Each day, probably something that's either single leg or limited base of support. So think like split stance, like B stance RDL, split squat, front foot elevated split squat, etc. Um, Now, as a teaching tool for controlling the pelvis, I like B stance RDL because what's going to happen is we're going to get a unique opportunity. Like I think what you're trying to ask with the bilateral stuff is we can get what's called ipsilateral hip shift, which sounds fancy, but we're just thinking ipsy, same side, lateral, hips moving lateral. So hips are shifting over our lead leg, right? So we're shifting our center of mass over our base of support. That's where if we're looking in the mirror, we're going to see that kind of big toe, knee, sternum in line, I think I mentioned earlier, which if we kind of visualize that, we can see the glute wrapping around the pelvis. In bilateral movements, we can't really push our hips to the side. And if we are doing that, we're probably doing something wrong, right? Like if we're shifting our hips so much in an RDL or in a squat that they're going to the side, it's probably going to end up not being a good time for anybody.
Yeah, no, we don't want to see we don't want to see glute med in a bilateral RDL. If you're seeing, what would that be? I mean, it's horizontal movement. It's not what we're going for. I I do find with a lot of competitors, myself included, discrepancies, largely due to some of the posing behaviors and patterns that are required for the sport. So, oftentimes, how I'm seeing this manifest is when they're actually going into their back pose, there is some degree of this like asymmetry in how their hips are rotated. Maybe it's due to a lack of ability to gain internal rotation on one side versus the other. And then with prolonged sessions that I would say lack a lot of unilateral movement, this just gets worse and worse. Is that something, I guess, like I'm asking this in a really disorganized way. Do you see a lot of that asymmetry at the hip in athletes that you work with within this demographic?
Yeah, and I think it's something too, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how like some of these concepts start to cross apply and how sometimes I might post something that you love for bodybuilding, but I'm saying it to everybody. And I think this is one of those categories where it doesn't matter if I'm training a gen pop or a bodybuilder or somebody in the NFL. Like most of these people have this issue, which is some discrepancy and ability to shift into one of the hips, right? Or just being able to find like a pelvis that doesn't rotate away from that lead leg. So I'd say that's us trying to circumvent getting hip internal rotation on that side, right? So if we're shifting, for example, you said contralateral B stance RDL. I never really answered your question. Yes, I love it as a teaching tool because what people are going to want to do is instead of keeping the hips square to the lead leg, they're going to rotate away as they hinge or as they do a lunge or a split squat, right? So we're trying to, instead of having our hips shift laterally over the lead leg, they're rotating away. So if we, again, put our hand on our glute and think about doing a split squat, pushing our hips over the lead leg, we'll feel more of a stretch. If we start to rotate our pelvis away from the lead leg, you're going to feel that shorten, right? So we're trying to circumvent getting hip internal rotation, getting a lateral hip shift, which is something that, again, most people struggle with because we don't really do it, right? The only time we really get exposure to these sort of positions outside of the gym is when we walk.
But Nick, when we shorten the glute, I feel it more. I get a better glute pump. I thought that means that I'm working the glute and I'm going to make sick gains, right?
Yeah, but do you ever get a pump when you're doing posing?
All the
Like, should we
time.
just
Like, it's
pose
so
instead of
painful.
lift? Yeah, exactly. Like under that logic, sensation is not necessarily stimulation. So we still need some degree of loading. Under that same note, we could just do like heavy hip extension isometrics. That's my next video. I'm just going to be a hack, and I'm going to post about how all we need to do is load the hip thrust heavier than we can actually extend our hips and just do isometrics, like do
Yeah.
long overcoming isometrics, and we're going to get massive glutes because we get a sick pump from it.
Just, I think someone may have beat you to it. I'm pretty sure there's a really big glute guru who, there's several actually. I shouldn't really isolate. Um, when we, okay, so sorry, I want to run back to B stance RDL. You see, you introduce it for a client. You notice that they are moving away from the lead leg. That back hip is hiking up. But they're telling you, I'm like, I'm doing what you're doing. How are we going to cue them? What are we going to do to the range of motion, even loading, even like tempo, rep scheme? What are some constraints that we can use to encourage better movement, better positioning?
Yeah, so with the B stance RDL, if we're rotating our hips away, first things first, I'm going to try to make things simple. Like this is something that happens a lot in like the pre-script labs that I run where like, we'll get some like really intricate answers or people ask questions like, oh, is it my gluteus minimus that's causing the issue here? And I'm like, no, hold on. Let's just try to square our hips up, right? Like, hey, I want you to square your hips. You're not doing it. Here's the video you sent me of you doing it. If we're in person, it's way easier. I'm going hands on hips. Hey, turn this way, right? You can see me. I want you to do the same thing, hands on hips for the set. We're turning this way. Tell them it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel like you're rotating way more than you actually are. But again, let's overemphasize this. That's a common theme I like to use when we're trying to improve movement. Overemphasize the cue that you're using because you're probably going to end up just doing it right. Like you're probably not going to actually overemphasize it if it's something that you're bad at. As a general rule, you could be in the minority, but probably it's going to be better for you to overemphasize that. So first things first, hips rotate towards the lead leg, hands on hips, try that. Next, look in a mirror. These are all simple things, right? I want you to watch yourself in a mirror, okay? I want you to record yourself and watch your feedback, right? Now you know what you're looking for. Hips rotating away, cool, I need to fix that. Now go back, try to overemphasize it again, fix it. Now from a constraint standpoint, what you were saying, like contralateral versus ipsilateral loading, we could say the contralateral loading, so think weight is in the arm opposite of the lead leg. We can kind of use that weight to pull us across, right? So think about kind of almost like touching that weight to the front toe or the front heel, but like reaching across the body, even pointing the back toe towards the lead heel. So adding in some constraints that are going to help influence us rotating over that lead leg or towards the lead leg.
I love it. And I'll say I've had clients overemphasize at the thoracic spine. Like they go full thoracic spine. The back hip
Oh,
is
dude.
still high. And I'm
Yeah.
like, don't look at the camera like that. Like just, okay. Like just look at
Yeah,
the
that's so.
ground. Like it's way
I'm
too
I'm ha
much.
I'm happy you say that because that's like one of the most common like compensations, for lack of better words, is we will try to rotate the torso instead of the pelvis. It's like I'm rotating, especially if we're holding weight. Like I said, contralateral. It's like, well, I'm rotating the weight towards the lead leg. But yeah, what we're doing is our hips are staying turned away, and we're just rotating at the torso. So we need to make sure that we're actually emphasizing. And that's why I said hands on hips earlier. I think it's one of the best ways just to practice. Hands on hips. Okay, turn to the lead leg. Turn to the lead leg. At the start of every single rep, think that. Like I'll literally see clients, especially in person, where I can watch every rep they do. I'll watch it in their head. I can see them like kind of reset, like a subtle reset, like like turn hips, lead leg, turn, turn, turn. But that's what I want in your head until we get it to be autonomous. Like I don't want us thinking about that for the rest of our training careers. But if we're not doing it right, we need to improve our skill, right?
Yes. And a few things I want to add to that. I find that for myself, as soon as I am at my working weight, whatever that is, like usually I'll do two warm-ups, maybe three, depending on the load that day. That is past the point of like reinforcing that cue. Like by the time I'm at, for B stance, if I'm at 90, I'm like, I should already have that back hip dropped. If I can't keep that back hip dropped on the warm-ups, then I don't really deserve to be going up to the weight that I might want to lift. It might feel good to lift, like mentally, but realistically, even if that day, if I can't handle that, then I probably need to go down. And it doesn't have to be down to 40s. It doesn't have to be 25 pounds, but a significant drop at least enough to be able to maintain that skill, because otherwise it's kind of like Jordan talking about like missing lifts. It's like you're just practicing doing it wrong.
Yeah, and like that's honestly one of the hardest sells too when we're correcting clients' movement is like I'm not training as hard, or I'm not training as heavy, so I can't possibly be getting the same stimulus. And it's like again, we'll circle back to magnitude and direction, or load and direction. So it's not just the load that we're moving, it's how we're moving it and where we're sending that stimulus. So again, if we're dropping the load a little bit, but we're really improving the direction of that stimulus, are we really even regressing?
No, exactly. And I think like people get very emotionally attached to, well, I've lifted this before, or I see someone else lifting it this weight for the same movement for this amount of reps, and forgetting the fact that like I almost look at it like an opportunity. If there is a deficiency in ability to stabilize, if there is a deficiency in skill, it's like we can work on this. And like realistically, you can probably yield results just from getting better at the skill alone.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's raising our ceiling for progress. So it's like sure, if we want to chase, the best performance we can hit in a singular block, right? Is pushing load or pushing reps with subpar form. It's like, yeah, I might have a sick block, but like what are we gonna do in the next block and the next block of training and the next block of training? It's like if we don't actually get better at execution, like we're gonna run out of ways to progress, right?
Absolutely. No, I love that. And I want to go back to pelvic stability, and specifically when we're talking about individuals who aren't as familiar with, like you just maybe they don't train core, maybe they don't have a good sense of like what it feels like to be ribs over pelvis. And something that I see a lot of is just this neglect of the psoas, and more specifically, it's like you're in these positions throughout the day outside of training that aren't really advantageous, and you oftentimes get then into your training session like I've been in all day, just seated, everything shortened. So then, yeah, like it might take a little bit of extra work, whether that's soft tissue work, whether that's just I would say more like mobility or warm up drills prior to actually doing something like a B stance, but it became, I would say, like I felt a lot of agency when I could identify that early in my sessions. If I had been working all day seated and then I get into my sessions, I'm like, oh, you know what? First warm up, I think my hips tucked, or yeah, I think my back hips tucked, but I'm feeling a lot of lower back, more sensation than pain. Cool. Okay. Rather than just forego B stance and move on to something else, I'm going to cue different movements that are not intended to be like part of my normal exercise program or my workout, but just different things to rather send that signal like, hey, this core needs to be braced. Like I need to have good connection here.
Yeah, and how many people are doing a good warm up like you just described? Or how many people are just going in and doing their foam rolling and their monster walks for a couple rounds and jumping straight into it?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, hey, a good band pump. It's been years since I've thrown like a loop on to, I don't know, just get good sensation. And maybe there is case use for that. But I feel like for me, like, the thing that offers the most return, especially if it's a day where I'm like, I just haven't been very active. I've been very sedentary. I've been locked into a computer. It's like, okay, I need to do something that's going to probably open up the hips, but I also need to do something that is going to cue the right positioning once I get under load. So I guess when we're talking about movements that would encourage better pelvic stability in a warm up, what are some of your go-tos, or what are ones that you see a lot of success in?
Yeah, so first I wouldn't even actually say pelvic stability. I'd say like what's something for a mobility standpoint. If we know our limitations, if we know we lack internal rotation, external rotation, we're looking to get better degrees of hip flexion, hip extension, we could do some more like passive modalities, like we were mentioning. We could do stretching, foam rolling, um, things we go in. It's going to help us relax a little bit. If we have tight muscles, it's going to help them relax. Now we can get into better positions. We can reinforce that. So then I would do something that's going to reinforce hip internal rotation, external rotation, maybe both. You said opening the hips, whatever that is. Maybe something that requires more like abduction, right? Incorporate that. Do something where we stand on one leg, maybe. Do something where we have to brace our core under load, get more awareness of a certain position. Or it could be something as simple as like something that I spam is always just like a foam roller between the knees, touch the floor, like literally just doing a hinge. Before I do RDLs, before I have clients do RDLs, that's going to give us proper foot position. It's going to make sure that we're getting relative internal rotation at the hips. It's going to help us move through the hips, and then we're going to feel a nice stretch through everything posterior, glutes, hamstrings, low back, even upper back, right? It's like something that's very general. We can also use that as a way to start to build like rib cage pelvis relationship in a warm up. But sorry, that's like if I'm just like a shotgun approach. If we want to get very specific, we could find. But anyways, the greater point is like let's break down the pieces of what our main exercises are on the day. What do I need to access based off of how I currently feel? What may I struggle with in my lift if I don't do some prep work now to make sure I can access those positions?
I like that. And I think it does take a lot of, I guess, proprioception to understand like when you've been out of the gym, like coming in, okay, where am I feeling it? And that's where I think having movements that there is a component around stability that, should be very challenging and should give you clues as to where are you lagging today. I think that's a really intelligent way to go about designing that warm up and building it out for the individual. Now, when we start getting into exercise design, workout design, exercise selection, I think for a lot of clients, I like starting with some kind of hinge movement or squat pattern. Now, because of discrepancies I've had like with injuries myself, like I do find that like unilateral work, I guess how I want to phrase that better. My stability has come a long way, but that's been really an opportunity that I've been exploiting like the last year. So a lot of that unilateral work, even though the load might be less than what I've done previously and now gotten to a point where it's, catching up to that, it's paid off in terms of hypertrophy. And I think a lot of clients kind of get caught up in this idea that, okay, in order for it to be a compound movement, it needs to be bilateral, or it needs to be a barbell back squat, a barbell deadlift, or RDL. How do you get that buy-in when you're, really designing that for a client, maybe in person, like explaining like, hey, there is more that we can garner if we switch to something unilateral.
Yeah, I compare it to flossing. It's like it's boring, it's tedious, but you should do it every day. That's how I view like unilateral movement, because like we have to have a conversation about, especially with bodybuilding, because at some point, especially for pushing mass, like we're gonna make trade-offs. Like we're probably gonna do less things that are training like function at the hip, for example, to do things that are higher output, higher external stability. Right, like as we're really pushing to put on mass, at some point we're probably gonna make that trade-off, right? Like we're not gonna do half of our workload as like Bulgarian split squat and then like B stance RDL. It's like sure, like at some point we're gonna have like more stuff that like that in our program, but I like to sell it as, hey, we're improving hip function, we're improving how you move, we're improving your ability to control and stabilize the pelvis, which is gonna have a really high point of return on exercises that aren't unilateral in nature. Right, so now when we go do a bilateral RDL or even like a leg press, it's like our ability to stabilize our pelvis and produce force is going to be way higher. And we're probably going to be healthier because we're actually making sure, like I said, flossing, we're moving through a full range of motion. We're making sure that things are staying happy. We're making sure that we have the capabilities to stabilize on one leg. Everything should be A-okay as long as we're moving through a relative range of motion and loading a relative full range of motion.
I like it. I think listeners will really be able to grab a lot from that. Now, let's go back to the hip thrust. Where are you at on the hip thrust? Do you like it? Do you despise it? Does it serve a purpose in certain cases? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm past the point of despising it. Like I think I'm pretty indifferent to it at this point. I'm very passionate to the point of despising like everything being a hip thrust. Like if I see a program and it's like barbell hip thrust, like Nautilus hip drive, 45-degree hip extension, and then it's like banded frog, glute pump something in the floor, and it's like, okay, we just did like 4 of the exact same exercise, just different variations of it. Like this is so redundant. That's the point where I get irritated. I think too the biggest premise of hip thrust for me is like mechanics aside is like I just don't want to have several exercises in the day where I'm spending more time loading on plates than I am actually training. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but like generally speaking, it's like I don't want to do barbell RDL, and I'm loading several plates on, and then I go do leg press, and then I do the hip drive, and then maybe I go do another single leg press, something. I don't know even what's in these programs nowadays, but yeah, generally speaking, I'm pretty indifferent to it. Like if you want to do it, it's fine. I think there's like some limitations to it in execution.
No, I agree. I'm with you, and it's something. It's interesting because the last few builds that I've done several years ago, I was hip thrusting 3 times a week. That was my A1. So I was starting movements off with 4 to 5 sets of hip thrust, anywhere from 10 to 20 reps. And like, sure, I saw growth, but I was also like, Jesus, like I'm doing like 400 pounds. Like I don't like how much more weight am I gonna have to do? Because my glutes, like they grew, but they didn't grow that much. Like they, there wasn't a hefty or reasonable return really for the amount of volume on a weekly basis. And it was really last year when I went through my last builds with Jordan, we took hip thrust out. And I mean, like my program was very much oriented around hinging unilateral squat patterns, so using a contralateral load. And with my intention, yes, it was to build stability, but it was also to load the glute med in a meaningful way that wasn't limited to just a machine abduction or a cable abduction, because that was kind of the other complaint I arrived to him with. I'm like, if I need to do 10 sets of 20, I can, but that's like, it's kind of lame and like super boring, but I don't feel like that's the answer yet. I'm sure you've seen too, just these excessive, these programs with an excessive amount of volume, specifically when we're talking about abduction or just movements that are supposed to target the glute med. I really liked, going into that build with him where we removed the hip thrust because largely it was like, okay, like you can push load. That was his understanding of it. Is like, you historically have done a lot of weight, but in terms of being able to control the descent, like it's not there. And frankly, like you're not in a great position to be able to get a lot out of it because of the way it's oriented. And it was only really the last few weeks that we brought it back in, given I'm in a fat loss phase. Some of the intensity, it's, as much as I might want it to be there is a cap on recovery. And now like plugging it in a very strategic fashion, so earlier in my workout, but also getting some volume through the hip thrust, while also making sure that it's done in a way to where it's not just about, hey, let's load up the bar and just go full send, just try to see how much weight you can get, because realistically I am still not going to be able to maintain that same position just given the design of the movement.
Yeah, do we want to elaborate on design of the movement? I think what you said was beautiful. I don't even know what else to add to that. Like that's a perfect context.
That's okay. I think so from here, actually, you know what? There's a video you posted. It's come to mind. 45-degree extension. So in replacement of a hip thrust, do you like using that earlier in the workout? Is that something that you find helpful for clients? If we're trying to find, I guess, use a movement that does put them in the shortened position, but also encourages the correct positioning, how do you feel about that and loading it up?
Yeah, I like to load it. I honestly, I get a little annoyed when I'm seeing like only body weight done, or like there's no attempt to load it, because it's like, oh, we're training our back though. It's a back exercise, right? Like that's what I always hear. No, I like it a little bit better, especially as a teaching tool for hip extension, because if we just look at like the orientation of a 45-degree hip extension, it should be pulling us into relative flexion, and I don't want anybody to go do it with like an absolute ass load of like thoracic flexion. I don't want to be like bent over like that, but like generally speaking, that's gonna help me pull my rib cage down towards my pelvis. So I'm gonna get, again, like we talked about earlier, a better rib cage to pelvis relationship. So more neutral pelvis. I'm gonna be able to extend my hips better and train my glutes better. As opposed to a hip thrust, one of the more common things that we're gonna see is the load and gravity is pulling us more into an extension posture. So if we're already somebody who biases getting into a lot of anterior pelvic tilt, it's only going to pull us more into anterior pelvic tilt while we're trying to extend the hips. So generally speaking, the constraints in the machine of a 45-degree hip extension make it a little bit easier to train our glutes effectively, just from a skill standpoint.
No, and I think there can be good crossover there, for then someone who maybe is transitioning to having hip thrust in their program, or reintroducing it like I have. But what I'll say is, like, when we move into that isolation work, For me, like the exercise selection is pretty limited, and honestly, I prefer it that way. I don't want a lot of variation, and so much so that like even during the build, like all three of my sessions, I mean, they looked fairly identical. Based on recovery, sure, there were some swaps that we made, but it was largely a hinge, a squat pattern, a leg press. And if, let's say, you know, for whatever reason the leg press was taken or was broken at our gym, sure, maybe we used a dumbbell step up with a contralateral load, and then some kind of kickback, which luckily we have like, what is it, the hip rotary, like the one that's like very stationary, which ours is designed well. I know not all of them are.
Like the multi-hip?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you?
I like it. I
Okay.
use it all the time. I don't necessarily use it for glute training. I use it more as like I look at it as a movement. It's like if I want to train adduction or hip extension or hip flexion per se.
Oh, interesting. Okay. No, I have a hard time training it for abduction. Like I feel like maybe just the orientation of, I don't know, maybe it's my structure, maybe it's the machine itself, or something else that I'm missing. I like it for kickbacks only because I feel like with cable kickbacks, that's one that there's a lot of variance in setup, also in like the actual cable you're using. So I know like for us bikini girls or wellness girls, it's like, hey, like we got to have kickbacks in our program. And for me, the thing that really was like getting a little frustrating is like, okay, if you're doing a cable kickback, and you're not able to replicate it symmetrically on both legs, or if let's say you're using a different cable and there are different resistant profiles on the cable itself, that always like irked me. I'm like, I don't want to like have a great session on my left and then like go to do my right and it be a completely different movement just because of, I don't know, the machine itself, what's available. But that one, if the machine is set up well, I really like. But I guess like to kind of like summarize like what we've covered here, I get no one one follow-up question I want to ask. When we're talking about these movements, specifically something like a hinge, a B stance, or even just like a heavy loaded split squat, how, I guess, what kind of intensity are you wanting to see?
High intensity. And we're trying to load it, right? Like exercises where we can load them well, like that's where that's going to win. So within parameters of technique, obviously, so we can even get into that. It's like, how good am I at executing this exercise? And some people, when they do like lighter weight, higher reps, and for higher reps here, let's even just say for take of something compound in nature, like 8 to 12. Maybe people, like certain people will get bored after 8 reps and their form goes to shit because they get bored. And this is not going to be a conversation about like mental discipline or anything. I'm just talking about like personality types, right? Other people, when they do like heavier loads, under heavier loads, generally speaking, they tend to not execute as well, right? So they aren't proficient enough under heavy loads to actually perform well. So based on someone's skill level, I would kind of use that as a guiding factor. But yeah, like generally speaking, like if I'm doing a hinge, like I want to load it. Like I don't want to have like for example, I was watching someone today do their dumbbell RDLs with a booty band around their knees and then a band tied to the rack behind them for like a horizontal force vector, and they were doing like 40-pound dumbbells. And I was just like looking at the girl and I was like, you're stronger than this. Like I have several females who do over 100 pounds in each hand that have less muscle than you. So I'm like, what kind of stimulus are we actually getting from all this like extra equipment going on here, as opposed to just like putting the hundreds in our hands and actually ripping it, right? Like actually getting meaningful load through our glutes. I think I went on a side tangent here because I was just like venting from earlier, but I think I'm still answering the original question.
No, no, you are, and really like I. How do I want to say this? I'm pretty sure I saw that same video.
Oh, dude, this is not a video. This is in person, boots on the
Oh,
ground. I
oh,
was in the
beautiful.
vicinity. I was like, should I say something? No.
Just no, I'll walk away. I'm just gonna remove myself. Yeah. Um, no, within the intensity argument, I mean, like something that really allowed me to, I would just say I was able to create like consistent intensity. Like I like using RIR or RP for other individuals. Like I like using that kind of as a barometer to determine like when I'm going to end the set. And like, sure, something with something like a hinge, like there is the point where I can tell and be like, okay, like I'm not maintaining pelvic positioning. Like I'm not, I'm failing technically before I am muscularly. And realistically, I think there's a cost if, if someone is chasing sensation, let's say, where as soon as that pump goes, they're just going to end the set. And oftentimes what I find is like having to explain, like, no, like if we're watching this on video, like if you are truly close to, like if your proximity to failure is just shy of actual failure, we should see a deceleration in rep speed. And that's largely what I want to see. And if that's because it's like, hey, you are working to fight to maintain position, even better. If you're losing position, then we need to probably scale that back and correct it because you're pushing past what technically you can tolerate. But yeah, no, I think that there in my sphere is very much this belief that like on my program, it says four sets of 10 to 15. So I'm going to do the weight that feels good, that I get a good glute pump, and I'm going to end it at 15 because I know that I can do, let's say, 40s, 45s on a bilateral RDL, and I know I can still feel my glutes by the end of 15. And I think that's where it's really important for clients, for athletes to just understand, like, feeling your glutes for a certain amount of reps, unless that is your goal, like you're leaving so much on the table. And if your goal is at all hypertrophy, like your proximity to failure, I find largely to be what's going to allow you to see that kind of adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any mystery anymore. It's pretty commonly established mechanical tension is going to be the leading driver of hypertrophy. So how do we get mechanical tension? The load, heavy weight, or get in close proximity to mechanical failure. And like you said, there's going to be some trade-off for higher skill exercises. So maybe we're going to stop when we hit technical failure, right? But maybe that little bit extra we might get for pushing closer to mechanical failure, our ability to load the exercise, right, is going to make up a little bit for that. It's like we can load RDLs heavy, we can load split squats heavy. Once we're good at them, we can load squats heavy, right? So even if we are leaving a little bit in the tank because our form's breaking down, like we're still sending a pretty good stimulus because we're still training close to mechanical failure. And it's just very loadable, right? We're putting a lot of load through muscle fibers. The other thing would be things that are more externally stabilized, or we can train close to mechanical failure. It's like, yeah, if we want to grow, we should be training close to mechanical failure. Like you're saying, there should be, honestly, I don't even love using RIR or like RPE. It's like, I want to see your videos, I want to watch you in person, and I want to see velocity, right? Is it slowing down? If I watch rep 12 and rep 1, literally I'll do that on WhatsApp when I get videos. Watch first couple reps, cool, go to the end. They shouldn't look the same. And if they look the same, I'm going to roast you. I say, hey, good job, but this is too easy. Like, oh, it feels so hard though. I'm like, subjectively, it's hard. I can empathize with that, but objectively, like it looks the same, right? You can see this, right? You can see rep 12, rep 1 look the same velocity. We could push a little harder.
I think it's a great way to go about it, and I would honestly say like a few clients, like I've even like walked them through. I'm like, hey, like if you have 12 reps, for me, how this manifests is like if I'm doing RDLs, like first 6 reps, first 3 are gonna be good. I'm gonna be like, yeah, this is fucking a lot of weight. Like this feels good. I'm in the right position. Cool. That's what's going on mentally. But by reps 4, 5, 6, I'm like, fuck, like this feels really heavy. Like I'm gonna have to lock in to get the next 50% of the set. By the next 3 reps, 7, 8, 9, I'm like, okay, really focus. Like your focus just needs to be on completing this set and maintaining this position, because I almost think about it. I'm like, okay, if I start to compensate, if I start to open up, or I start to lose full foot pressure, we're kind of just defeating the purpose. We're not doing what we're here to do. But those last 3 reps, it should almost be like questionable whether you can complete that. And, like we were talking about with cueing, is like, I like to almost over cue intensity, because I think for a lot of my demographic and myself, it's like, you might have a lot more that you can give. You just haven't been exposed to what that feels like. And it might feel truly impossible. And if we can establish that as a consistent benchmark to try to attain within, obviously what's safe for the athlete, I think you're going to see a lot faster results, a lot better results. And like, you're probably going to see your performance go up.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's almost, on us as coaches to identify that. And I think like at least one of the biggest things for me is like what really creates buy-in with clients is just like believing in them. Oh my God, I can't do that much more weight. It's like, yeah, you can. Like, I promise you, I wouldn't tell you to do this if you couldn't do it. Like show them that you believe in them. Obviously we saw videos where we watched them do their last set and like it looked easy. Even if it felt hard, we know they can do more weight, right? So just like showing them that we believe in them and like telling them they can do it oftentimes will create really good buy-in.
I love it. No, I think the training feedback has been essential in being able to help clients and unlock new territories that historically would have been ones they just never would have touched. Nick, this has been good. I'm really excited. I know people are going to love this. Where can people find you if they want to tune into this content, if they want to learn more? You have Patreon. You're starting a Patreon.
No, okay, hold on. So you can find me at Instagram or on YouTube. YouTube's getting back up and going. Nick Ridpath _ for both. Not Patreon, but I will be creating a portion of my website that's going to be Patreon-esque, where I'll be posting some, like case studies and like some topics like how to better train your glutes or my thoughts on different things. So, yeah, that'll be coming out soon.
That's amazing. And then, what labs are you doing within the collective?
Yes, I do. I forget what we even labeled them. I do a general pre-script lab every Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. I do the athletic development lab every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So it's a bit more geared towards sports performance, but again, like sometimes we'll get more like normie questions where I think it cross applies to athletics as well. So I just like to touch on that stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have pushed the collective on a lot of my clients who maybe aren't in a position to go through L1, but they just generally want to understand these things better. Before Jordan and I started dating, like I was a part of the collective, like just lurking for a good like year and a half. And I was like, shit, like there's a lot of information here. So you guys, if you are interested in seeing more Nick, go give him a follow, go tune into his content, maybe join him in a lab. Nick, thank you so much for doing this. This was great. Excited to have you back on in the future. You guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, I will see you in the next one.